So was Jahmyr Gibbs in his first year. And Gibbs was excellent, dumping it off to him in the screen game. Reminds me a lot of Darren Sproles, a bigger version of Darren Sproles, and that kid can go, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs. So when you have all those offensive elements working for you, usually the pitfall is, well, you only have one football. You can't throw it to anyone, right? Which is true, but it presents issues defensively as far as who are you going to single out? And here's what it's going to work out. And this is why, if you're a Lions fan, you're going to love it. If you're Ben Johnson, you love it even more, because each week is going to be a different guy that the Lions are going to lean on to close out games.
So let's turn the page to the more important discussion, Nick, is from that fantasy perspective. So if the Lions are going to game plan, feature certain players for particular matchups versus others, obviously game script matters too. If they're winning, they want to run the football. If they need to come from behind, if they've got a heated NFC North battle against the likes of Green Bay or Chicago, I'm just trying to figure out which of the pass catchers, running backs you covet from this Detroit Lions team, because yes, you want the ceiling, you want these guys to win games against the Vikings as well. Didn't forget you, but
right.
You also want a floor and a level of consistency, which is something that we've expected from Amon-Ra the last 3 years, or Sam LaPorta last year as the overall tight end one. So how do you determine, I guess, do you have a priority for any one of these guys in particular, your strategy surrounding the Detroit Lions and assessing them for fantasy? And then I can give you my own take as well.
Well, I'll say this, because of the chemistry that has been forged between St. Brown and Jared Goff. If you are in the PPR league, you're going to lean heavily on St. Brown because he's going to get the ball. He's going to get the ball no matter what, inside, outside. They're going to find a way to funnel the ball to him. Now, if we're talking inside the red zone, I'm thinking maybe LaPorta, just because of his athleticism and his size, because that reminds me a lot of a guy I faced, Tony Gonzalez. But the thing that makes it really difficult, because when you look at the backfield, you're saying, okay, well, which back you think is going to get the most touches, not carries, the most touches. And for me, that's going to be a game-to-game type of viewpoint. But based on pure explosion and that alone, I would lean more heavily towards Gibbs than Montgomery.
Okay, so I'm a David Montgomery guy as well. I think you're getting floor where Jahmyr Gibbs is certainly going to have his spike weeks, but it's the price difference too. Jahmyr Gibbs is an end of the first round pick. If I want a Lion in the first round, it's definitely Amon-Ra for me. And David Montgomery, meanwhile, is going closer to running back 20, clearly an RB2, but at the same time, someone who you can either start as your, again, RB2, or if you're a running back heavy draft, he can come off the bench. And again, any injury to one or the other, Gibbs or Montgomery, I'd say that other running back is immediately a top 5, top 10 fantasy asset. I love what you said about Amon-Ra. So I'm just going to start naming receivers, and you say stop when Amon-Ra is someone you would draft over him. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, wide receiver number 1 according to Fantasy Football, CeeDee Lamb.
Yes.
Tyreek, you want Amon-Ra over CeeDee Lamb?
Yep.
Done.
Yeah.
Explain, Nick.
The reason why I say that, because I know CeeDee Lamb was a fantasy darling last year, and when you look at the Cowboys and you say, okay, well, what other option does Dak Prescott have outside of CeeDee Lamb? Well, first and foremost, we don't know what the situation with the Dallas Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb is going to be entering the season. So that's the first conundrum you have to get over. Now, could you draft him, stash him on your fantasy roster with the idea that, you know what, eventually he's going to play? For me, I like to bet on sure things. And we're talking about a sure-handed wide receiver, a guy that people slept on years ago, who only continued to get better and better. And when you look at his route running, it is not as superior as Devontae Adams, but this is a guy who's got that quick change of direction, and they use him in multi ways. They can put him out wide, he can do work. But when Ben Johnson motions him down, gets him matched one-on-one, when defenses in their sub package, that's the go-to guy. They always know, but he seems to get open. Sort of like some guys that who used to play for the Patriots, Julian Edelman, those type of guys, Danny Amendola. So Amon-Ra St. Brown is like that because he can find those soft spots, but he's a little more explosive when you talk about hitting that second gear. So that's why I put him over CeeDee Lamb. But for the sake of conversation, I want to hear what your list was going to be like anyway.
I have CeeDee Lamb 1. I know what I'm doing. Fantasy football hasn't had the wide receiver 1 repeat as the wide receiver 1 since DeAndre Hopkins in Houston. Again, this is like a Houston Texans episode in a way. When he did it back-to-back years, 2017, 2018. I basically have it CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and then Amon-Ra and Justin Jefferson flip a coin for me. Genuinely. I'm not knocking Justin Jefferson because J.J. McCarthy got hurt. We knew Sam Darnold was starting anyway. And again, he ate with Nick Mullins, your guy. If Nick Mullins is back in, I feel pretty comfortable with Justin Jefferson overall. But from a PPR perspective, Amon-Ra is 3, maybe 4 behind CeeDee and Tyreek.
Well, I mean, I'm not that far off between your number 1 and number 2. Once again, when you look at Tyreek Hill, I'm thinking Jalen Waddle and that bevy of running backs that Mike McDaniels loves to throw to in the screen game. That may take some of his catches away, but Tyreek is going to get his based on explosive plays. We know that for sure. Inside the red zone, Tyreek Hill wasn't known for that with the Kansas City Chiefs. But when you talk about explosive plays over 20, 30 yards, that's where he was money.
Well, Nick, here's the thing. Here's the good thing about Tyreek Hill. If you're catching 30-yard bombs, you don't have to worry about the red zone. You can score from 80, 70 yards out. Why worry about what goes on in the red zone?
Exactly. So the only competition for Tyreek Hill is his heir apparent in Jalen Waddle, right?
Yeah. Who I like too. But
where was he on your list?
He's probably a tiers below, but I have him, I pretty much have him grouped with like Puka and Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson. I have him above Chris Olave. This is based on vibes mostly. I just don't trust the New Orleans Saints. But I have him clearly, if you've got a crop of 12 wide receivers, I have him somewhere between 12 and 15, probably.
But does this have anything to do with Tyreek Hill on the NFL Top 100? He was a number 1 player. Does this have anything to do with that?
Well, I mean, yes, if Tyreek Hill's number 1, then that means Jalen Waddle has to be 2, obviously. Nick, we'll get back to, clearly we've got more fantasy stuff we need to cover before we get into the season. But circling back to the Detroit Lions, we do this with every NFL team. Nick, I'm asking you for the floor and the ceiling with the Detroit Lions team, which again, first time they won the division since 1993. I do not know. I was definitely not alive the last time that they were back-to-back division champions. So, Nick, I'm going to ask you what the floor is for this team, whether it's a wild card, division, miss the playoffs, and if they do have, that ceiling of making the Super Bowl, even winning it, because let's be honest, if it wasn't for their, they've addressed the corner position. That's the reason they didn't get into the Super Bowl, was the corner with the ball doink off his helmet, and Brandon Ayuk came up with that grab.
So the floor for me for the Detroit Lions, they're going to win the NFC North, right?
Okay, back to back.
The ceiling for them, they're right back in the mix again in that NFC Championship game. I'm not saying they're winning it, but I'm putting them right back in that same game, right? Maybe with the San Francisco 49ers in a rematch, but the outcome is still the same because I just believe in Kyle Shanahan and Christian McCaffrey.
Okay, so we did this with Amon-Ra. We can do it with the NFC as well. You've got the 49ers above the Lions. Any other teams you want to point to specifically in the NFC that you have ahead of Detroit right now?
Ooh, ahead of Detroit. No, you know what? I'll stay in the NFC North. After having the chance to look at the Green Bay Packers, Jordan Love, and had a chance to talk to Brian Gutekunst of all things, right? And commended him on putting together a great team. So that Packers team is going to be right there. There's no, playoff hangover, anything like that. They're just going to get much better.
He's Nick Ferguson. I'm Alex Hardy. Those are the Detroit Lions. Make sure you go back on earlier episodes of those guys for any other teams you want to hear from us